Today we're going to talk about consciousness, and consciousness is perhaps the greatest mystery in the universe. Scientists have come so far in their understanding of reality, yet in many respects, we're still groping around in the dark. Scientists have smashed elementary particles together to gain insights into what reality is made of, but the best they can do is study properties like mass, spin, and charge. They've learned so much about the fundamental forces of nature, like gravity and magnetism, and the forces that bind protons and neutrons together or repel them. But what these forces are, they have no idea. Like, what is a charge? Add consciousness to the mix and the mystery only deepens, because as far as scientists have come in understanding matter and energy, consciousness is nowhere to be seen in these elementary particles and the forces that operate in the universe. So the main concept that philosophers and neuroscientists wrestle with is the idea of a soul. That's the great debate today. For thousands of years, humans have believed in a soul. But since the 20th century, many scientists have called into question this idea and believe the day will come when science can explain consciousness without the need for a soul. But are there good reasons to throw out the soul and stick with a purely physical explanation for consciousness? Have scientists cracked the code? Do they know what consciousness is? Have they proven that there's no soul responsible for our thoughts, emotions, or will? It seems that consciousness is a rare phenomenon in the universe, yet somehow, some of the unconscious bits of matter floating around in the universe came together and formed conscious beings. If an intelligent being is not responsible for consciousness, then how a foreign phenomenon like conscious awareness suddenly emerged from unconscious elements demands an explanation. Of course, we all approach this subject with a priori commitments to certain worldviews, but which explanation best explains what we know to be true about consciousness? Now, there are many different theories out there about what consciousness is, its origin, and how it operates. So let me briefly introduce you to some of the most popular theories of consciousness you're going to encounter. Number one, substance dualism. This has been the traditional view of the church and most of humanity, actually. In this view, human beings are comprised of two substances, hence dualism. One is physical, which is the body and the brain, and the other spiritual, or immaterial, which would be the soul or the mind. Soul and spirit, in my opinion, can be used interchangeably, although I prefer to use the word spirit because of the New Testament's use of the word, and we're going to get into that later. Another view out there is called Physicalism. Human beings in this view are purely physical. Even consciousness can be explained in physical terms if we just understood the physical laws governing it. There is no spiritual substance that houses our consciousness. It is to be found in the brain and the brain only. Our first-person experience arises or emerges from the firing of neurons in the brain, and there's nothing more to it. Then you've got Panpsychism. In this view, all of reality has proto-consciousness programmed into it. Even the electrons or the strings that form the elementary particles of our reality are imbued with a very basic form of consciousness. Then you've got quantum theory of consciousness. In this idea, consciousness arises from quantum processes in the microtubules in the brain. Then you've got idealism. In this view, all things are mind. Reality itself is a mind-type substance. Our minds are what give reality expression. Not all agree that this universal mind is God's mind, though. And then you've got the simulation hypothesis, which is the idea that we live in a computer simulation like a video game. If you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, that's a good way to think about this idea of living in a simulation. Now, here's the thing about all these different views. No matter which one you take, I believe inevitably it will lead to God. So in this series of videos, I hope to show that God is the best explanation for why we see conscious beings in the universe and why we possess first-person experiences. Now let's talk about physicalism. The physicalist view of consciousness is the predominant view in the academic and scientific world, so it's appropriate that we start here. Now, physicalism, or formerly known as materialism, is the idea that everything in the universe, even consciousness, has a physical cause and carries out physical processes. Physicalists believe the universe is a closed system. Therefore, other substances or properties outside of the physical universe either don't exist or cannot interact with the physical world. So consequently, most physicalists believe immaterial substances like spirits and souls are outdated concepts that need to be discarded. Although science may not have the answer yet, physicalists believe the day will come when humans crack the consciousness code and include it in a unified theory of everything. Now let's talk about some of the deficiencies of physicalism. There are definitely problems with this view. And since physicalists don't believe in souls or spirits, they can only stay within what they call the physical boundaries of our reality. As we'll discuss later, the idea of a physical boundary is misguided because the more we learn about physical matter, the more we discover matter is not so physical after all. But for the sake of this video, let's just follow their line of thinking. We quickly see the ontological conundrum they find themselves in because of their a priori commitments to naturalism. Since everything is physical in this system, including consciousness, then all the physicalist has to work with are the fundamental forces of nature and the bits of matter created at the Big Bang, all of which have never shown properties like consciousness in isolation. Of course, panpsychists would object here, but we'll get to that later. But how do we get consciousness from unconscious bits of matter in this worldview? The magic word is emergentism, and it is magic because only magic could create consciousness out of non-consciousness. So the idea consciousness can arise from complex molecular arrangements is known as emergentism. The defectiveness of this view is seen in a simple thought experiment. Suppose we could build a sentient brain using atoms. Atoms and the chemicals made from them are identical for both thinking brains and non-thinking brains. According to naturalistic ideas of consciousness, once a certain level of complexity is reached, our man-made brain will become aware and start feeling and having experiences. This implies that consciousness can be turned on and off like a switch by removing or adding just one atom. Right? There has to come a point when consciousness turns on, when that one atom is added. So the removal of that one atom would turn consciousness off. However, there is empirical evidence that damage to the brain or removing large chunks of the brain do not turn consciousness off. Neuron cells in our brains live for many years, but their components, the proteins and the molecules that make up the cell, are continually being replaced. Yet our consciousness remains intact as atoms are recycled. Are we to believe that consciousness depends on complex arrangements of matter, but millions and millions of pieces of this matter can come and go, and somehow the personality stays intact? It can't be both ways. If it takes a complex arrangement of matter to turn consciousness on, then you'd have to keep that complex arrangement of matter to keep it on. Now, it is quite a leap to go from complex arrangements of molecules to consciousness without explaining the mechanism that flips the switch to make the molecules conscious. The only ingredients molecules have to work with are charge, spin, and mass, and other properties held by elementary particles. But this is not enough to produce a conscious experience. What is it exactly that causes a completely foreign phenomenon like consciousness to arise from the complex arrangement of unconscious matter? Brendan Rickabaugh and J.P. Moreland make an excellent point in their book. Emergence seems to be a case of getting something for nothing, a case of magic without a magician. If matter is relevantly similar to what current physics and chemistry tell us, and it is bereft of any sort of mental entities, then matter does not have mental potentialities. Given this, it is hard to see how the mere spatial rearrangement of, say, atomic simples to form a more complicated spatial structure would be an adequate cause for bringing into existence ex nihilo a completely new sort of entity. Exactly. To say consciousness emerges from complex arrangements of matter requires that there be a specific moment in time when the matter that makes up the brain suddenly comes alive. The atoms in the brain go from possessing mass, spin, and charge to possessing a completely different phenomenon or property like consciousness, when just one atom is added to the mix. If the matter was not conscious to begin with, how is more unconscious matter arranged in a complex way going to change that? J.P. Moreland writes, if you say in the beginning were the particles, and all you do is rearrange those particles, you're going to end up with a more complicated arrangement of particles. You will not get mind popping into existence just by forming complex arrangements of molecules. That's to get something from nothing. Now to say in the beginning was the logos, or the word, or if your ontology or worldview begins with mind, or God, then there is no difficulty in explaining where mind comes from. On a theistic view, the fundamental entity is not the electron or a string, it's a mind. If you start with mind, it's not hard to explain how you come up with other minded things. That's a very good point. So think about this. If everything is physical, where do different personalities come from? If physicalists are only going to look to matter and energy as the only ingredients for consciousness, then they need to explain how this accounts for different personalities among conscious beings. Even animals show distinct personalities, so physicalists need to explain how different consciousnesses emerge from identical unconscious atomic and subatomic properties. As far as we know, atoms and the elementary particles that make up matter do not have first-person awareness. Of course, panpsychists would disagree. Remember, all the electron or any elementary particle could ever bring to the table are the properties of mass, charge, spin, and so forth. And the mass, charge, and spin, all these properties are the same for each particle. The mass isn't a little different in one electron, and the spin isn't a little different in another electron. It's uniform. But consciousness is not like this. All conscious beings have different personalities. So to say that consciousness can emerge from these basic uniform properties still demands an answer. How did thinking organisms, all with different personalities, arise from this rather than robots that all think the same? If consciousness did emerge from these particles, all we would see are robots that compute information. But these robots would have no opinions on anything, no taste in music, art, or movies, and no distinct personalities. Now think about this as well. Where do different opinions come from? It seems more likely that if consciousness did emerge from matter, that all you could possibly get from this are robots. Again, robots, all they do is process information, but they don't derive meaning from that information. So physicalists need to answer how all the different personalities we see in nature have different opinions about reality if they are all made from matter, which has no opinion or thought about anything. As William Hasker asked, how can soggy gray brain stuff give rise to technicolor phenomenology? If consciousness is just the movement of molecules and electricity in the brain, then how can one person hear Mozart's music and love it, and another person listen to it and hate it? From the physicalist standpoint, it's the same sound frequencies hitting both sets of ears. It's the same information being communicated. It's the same movement of molecules and the same physical processes going on in the brain, yet you have two different responses arising from this physical phenomenon. Therefore, there must be something beyond the physical that is experiencing the liking and the disliking. Molecules don't like or dislike, but a person with a mind does. It is an experience of the thinker with the mind, and while we can see a physical correlation in the brain, like we can see neurons firing, that physical activity in the brain isn't the experience of liking or disliking Mozart's music. Now think about where different talents come from. Consider how physicalism fails to explain different talents and abilities, or where talent even comes from. I'll use Mozart again as an example. He's my favorite composer. Wolfgang Mozart and his older sister, whom they nicknamed Nannerl, were both raised in the same musical environment with a father who played violin and composed music. Both siblings were trained by their father, and Nannerl, being the oldest, had her father's undivided attention and actually had an advantage. Both siblings had the same DNA. You're right, they had the same father and mother, same environment, and the older sister, remember, had a couple years head start. Yet the younger brother turned out to be one of the greatest musical composers in Western music and showed far more talent than his sister. We can't attribute that to complexity because the atomic structure of the two siblings was very similar. According to Physicalism, both Wolfgang and his sister, they're just atoms and molecules following the deterministic laws of physics. So all things being equal, the outcomes or the level of talent should have been the same. It should have been predictable, like it was performed in a lab. Setting aside where talent even comes from, Physicalism cannot explain how the complex arrangement of matter that formed the physical brain of Wolfgang produced the consciousness of a musical genius, and the same complex arrangement of matter that formed the sister's brain didn't produce the same kind of consciousness. Now let's talk about the knowledge argument, which is one of the most effective thought experiments to demonstrate the incoherence of physicalism. Now there's different versions of this, but I'm going to give you mine. In this thought experiment, there is a girl named Mary who lives 500 years in the future. Mary was born with a condition where she can only see in black and white. Mary also happens to be the world's leading expert on consciousness and neuroscience. Since she lives 500 years in the future, humans have learned all there is to know about the science of color and how the brain responds to wavelengths of light. So Mary knows all there is to possibly know about the physical properties and the physical laws involved in seeing colors. One day, Mary decides to take advantage of new technology, and she receives new eyes that can see in color. The question debated among philosophers is this: if Mary knew everything there was to know physically about sight, colors in the brain before the surgery, could there be anything new to learn about the brain and consciousness when she sees in color for the first time? Physicalism claims there is nothing more than the physical properties involved. But if Mary did learn something new that went beyond knowledge of physical processes, then consciousness can't just be physical. It is physical, but it's not just physical. An inner experience of color is radically different than understanding something on a cognitive level. So when Mary gains the ability to see in color, she gains new knowledge. Since the knowledge she gained cannot be explained in physical terms, that is, what it's like to see red, there must be more to consciousness than physical properties. Like, can you explain to somebody what red is? Can you explain what it is to see red? No. Philip Goff contributes to this. The great progress of neuroscience in understanding the mechanisms underlying color experience has been unable to provide the colorblind with any insight, zero, nothing, nada, into what it's like to have color experience. And there is no reason at all to think this will change when a few more details are added. On this basis, the proponent of the knowledge argument can believe with confidence the key premise of the argument, that neuroscience cannot teach the blind or the colorblind what it's like to have a color experience. Now let's change the example above with Mary and make her deaf instead of blind. So instead of seeing color for the first time, we're going to have her hear music for the first time. Mary could know everything about the science of music. She could know pitch. She could understand the physics of acoustics. She could know all the science behind the physical processes involved in hearing, like what happens when the eardrum takes the signal and takes it to the brain. She could know all of that. But until she hears the music, she won't know what it's like. Understanding the science and physical processes involved in hearing music will never move Mary to tears. But if she gets new eardrums that could hear, something would take place in her mind that transcends the chemical processes in her brain, and she would hear beauty. It's the quality of beauty that emerges from the physical properties that makes consciousness more than just physical properties. Now, of course, she may not like what she hears, but the point is, experiencing that sound is new. It's not just physical. It's something that takes place on the inside, in the mind. Now, think about this as well. Where does meaning come from? Physicalism fails to explain how meaning is derived from processing or computing information in the brain. As an example, if you have an iPhone, say, "Hey Siri, you're an idiot." She will answer, "Hey, that's not very nice." While Siri may sound human, she is in fact a computer program and is programmed to respond to negative comments. Siri has no feelings about what you say to her, and there is no person named Siri who is conscious and can derive meaning from your words. Likewise, no matter how intelligent robots and machines become in the future, they will never experience consciousness. Artificial intelligence is a legitimate concern for our generation, but I don't think machines will ever start thinking on their own and go beyond the codes we program into them. David Barnett presents an interesting thought experiment to help explain how consciousness could not arise from the unity of countless atoms and molecules in the brain to give meaning to information. He presents a scenario where there are billions of tiny men working together by pressing a button when they see certain lights or symbols. Each man is independent from all the others and only knows when to press a button when certain stimuli are presented. But each man is unaware of anything beyond their individual task and know no further information beyond flashes of light and symbols. The question is, can a mastermind be produced from the merging of the individual consciousnesses that can see all of the flashes of light and get a unified message? We know this is highly unlikely. So in the same way, our neurons in isolation, they act as their own consciousnesses, and they can't possibly know anything about another neuron other than the signal it emits. If a billion conscious men, we're starting with consciousness when we're starting with men, if they can't produce a unified conscious experience by forming a mastermind when they have consciousness, it's even more unlikely that a billion unconscious bits of matter can give rise to a unified conscious experience from processing bits of information. Or is it? Panpsychists think they have found a solution to the problem by making all of the smallest bits of matter conscious to begin with. Everything in reality, down to electrons and quarks or strings, has a basic form of consciousness they call proto-consciousness. This means that the little bits of matter that make up our brains already have a lower level of consciousness. So when they all get together, a higher level of consciousness emerges from this. Now, the Bible seems to teach against the idea that there is consciousness or life or spirit in all inanimate objects. Let's look at Habakkuk. What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, "Awake," to a silent stone, "Arise." Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in it, or ruach, spirit. So we really haven't gotten anywhere with panpsychism because even if they're correct about reality, God is still the best explanation for where the proto-consciousness came from. Any degree of consciousness would have to be preceded by someone with a greater degree of consciousness, right? Consciousness begets consciousness. So theism is still the best explanation for the origin of consciousness. So let's say in the future that they prove that physicalism is true and they can explain exactly how it works. Well, you still haven't proven there's no God. God is still the best explanation for how, unconscious bits of matter can come together to form a conscious being. That is a miracle. That would also require God. So, any way you slice it, quantum theory, physicalism, panpsychism, you name it, it all started with God because He is mind. He is aware. He is life. Okay? So in the next video, we're going to continue with this theme. So I will see you there.